The blood-red horizon swallowed the last rays of sunlight as Tabitha Morgan fell to her knees before the freshly dug grave. The wooden cross, crude and hastily made, bore only a name and 2 dates her husband's short life reduced to stark numbers carved into pine. Arizona Territory, 1885, was an unforgiving place for a young widow with nothing but a failing homestead and memories to keep her company. "James," she whispered, her fingers tracing the letters of his name. "What am I supposed to do now?" The wind offered no answer, only swept across the small cemetery on the hill overlooking her property, tugging at her black mourning dress. At 22, Tabitha had not imagined herself alone, her dreams of family and prosperity buried alongside her husband of 3 years. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until they stopped nearby. She didn't look up, even as boots crunched on the dry earth behind her. "Mrs. Morgan." The voice was low, respectful. She recognized it immediately. Garrett Blackwood, foreman at the neighboring Diamond B Ranch. She'd seen him at the funeral yesterday, standing solemnly with his hat in his hands, but they hadn't spoken. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged, still staring at the grave. "Come to pay your respects again?" "Yes, madam. And to check on you." Tabitha didn't respond. James had been gone only 5 days, taken by a fever that burned through him like wildfire. 5 days that felt like 5 lifetimes. Garrett moved closer, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the grave in the fading light. "It's getting dark, Mrs. Morgan. You shouldn't be out here alone." "I'm not alone," she said, her voice breaking. "James is here." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, Garrett knelt beside her in the dirt, seemingly unconcerned about his clean denims. "Mrs. Morgan, Tabitha, I know what it's like to lose someone who is your whole world." She glanced at him then, really seeing him for the first time. Garrett Blackwood was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but striking, with a quiet strength about him. She'd heard rumors that he'd lost a wife some years back, before moving to Arizona. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. His eyes met hers, filled with an understanding that needed no words. "No, but someday, you'll wake up and find you can carry it." Tabitha turned back to the grave, tears flowing freely now. "I don't know how to do this. The homestead, the debts, everything. It was supposed to be us together." Garrett didn't offer platitudes or unwanted advice. Instead, he simply took her hands in his. His palms were rough with calluses, but warm and surprisingly gentle. "We'll try again, when you're ready," he said softly. Tabitha stared at him, confused. "Try what again?" "Living," he answered simply. "Not just surviving. When you're ready, I'll help you try living again." Something in his words, in the sincerity of his gaze, anchored her in that moment. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps the first intimation that hope might someday return. "I don't even know you," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But James did. He spoke of you often when we worked together. Said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known." Garrett released her hands and stood. "And strong women need time, not charity." He tipped his hat respectfully. "My offer stands. When you're ready, whether that's to talk about running the homestead or just to have a cup of coffee with someone who understands, you know where to find me." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Tabitha remained by the grave until the stars emerged overhead. Her husband was gone, but somehow, in the midst of her grief, a stranger had offered her something precious, not false comfort or empty promises, but respect for her pain and the space to heal in her own time. The sun rose over the plains, casting long shadows across Tabitha's small homestead. 3 weeks had passed since James's death, and each day had been a bitter struggle of grief and practicality. She stood on the porch, a cup of cooling coffee in her hands, surveying the property. The Morgan homestead was modest, a 2-room cabin, a small barn, a chicken coop, and 50 acres that James had been determined to turn productive. He'd been making progress too, before the fever took him. Now, the vegetable garden was overrun with weeds, the fence on the north side needed mending, and the single milk cow was producing less each day. Tabitha set her jaw. She had grown up on a farm in Missouri before marrying James and following his dream west. She knew farming, but James had handled the business side of things. Yesterday, she'd finally forced herself to go through his papers and discovered the truth of their situation. She was deeply in debt. The mortgage on the land, the loan for seed and equipment, all of it was coming due in less than 2 months. The sound of an approaching wagon drew her attention. She squinted against the morning sun to see Garrett Blackwood driving a buckboard toward her cabin. Straightening her simple blue dress and patting her dark hair, which she'd hastily pinned up, she walked down the steps to meet him. "Mr. Blackwood," she called as he pulled the team to a halt. "Mrs. Morgan," he nodded, jumping down from the wagon. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all." She noticed the wagon was loaded with wooden posts and rolls of wire. "What's all this?" Garrett removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "I recalled James mentioning your north fence was giving you trouble. Thought I might lend a hand fixing it, if you're agreeable." Tabitha hesitated. Pride warred with practicality. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the thought, but I can't afford to hire help right now." "I'm not looking to be hired, madam. It's Sunday, my day off from the Diamond Bee. Just being neighborly." She studied him for a moment. His expression was open, without pity. "You must have better things to do on your day off than mend a stranger's fence." A smile ghosted across his face. "Can't think of a single one." Despite herself, Tabitha felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. "At least let me feed you lunch, then." "Deal," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll get started." For the next several hours, Tabitha divided her time between household chores and watching Garrett work. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his craft, efficiently replacing broken posts and stretching new wire. Occasionally, she brought him water, and they exchanged brief pleasantries, but mostly she left him to the task. By midday, she had prepared a simple meal of cornbread, beans, and the last of her preserved peaches. When she called him in, he washed up at the pump outside, then entered the cabin, ducking slightly under the doorframe. "Smells mighty fine, Mrs. Morgan," he said, taking the seat she indicated at the small table. "It's nothing special," she replied, serving him before taking her own seat. "And please, call me Tabitha. Mrs. Morgan makes me feel like my mother-in-law." Garrett smiled. "Tabitha, then. And I'm Garrett." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Tabitha gathered her courage. "May I ask you something personal, Garrett?" He looked up from his plate. "You may. I've heard you lost your wife." "Is that true?" A shadow passed over his face, but he nodded. 5 years ago. Her name was Sarah. We were homesteading in Colorado when a blizzard hit. She took sick with pneumonia." He paused. "Doctors couldn't do anything." "I'm sorry," Tabitha said softly. "And you've been alone since then?" "Moved around a bit. Took the job at Diamond Bee about 2 years ago." He met her eyes. "It gets easier to breathe after a while. But there are still days when something reminds me of her so strongly, it's like losing her all over again." Tabitha nodded, blinking back tears. "Yes, that's exactly it." Garrett finished his meal and thanked her. As they walked back outside, he said, "The fence should hold now. Is there anything else you need help with while I'm here?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Actually, yes. I've been going through James's papers, and I'm trying to make sense of our financial situation. I think it's not good." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "I can take a look if you'd like. I do the books for the Diamond Bee sometimes." For the next hour, they sat at the table, heads bent over James's scattered papers. Garrett was methodical, organizing everything into neat piles and explaining things in straightforward terms. The picture that emerged confirmed Tabitha's fears. "So I have 6 weeks to come up with $80, or I lose everything," she said finally, her voice flat. Garrett ran a hand over his jaw. "That's the gist of it. But you have options. You could sell some of the equipment, maybe the cow, and then how would I work the land? How would I feed myself?" She shook her head. "Or I could just give up now, sell the homestead for whatever I can get, and go back to Missouri with my tail between my legs." "There's another option," Garrett said quietly. "You could fight for it." Tabitha looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "How?" "The land's good. James chose well. With the right help, you could make this work. I can't afford to hire hands." "No, but you could trade. Sheriff Tucker's boy is looking for work, and he's strong as an ox. Maybe you could offer him meals and a small share of whatever you harvest. Same for the Wilkins girl, she's a hard worker." Tabitha considered this. "And the mortgage payment?" Garrett hesitated. "I have some savings." I could loan you. No, she interrupted firmly. I won't take your money, Garrett. He studied her for a moment, then nodded with what looked like respect. Fair enough. What about selling at the mercantile? I've seen your needlework on the quilt in the other room. Folks pay good money for quality handcrafts. The idea took root immediately. Tabitha had always been skilled with a needle, and she had fabric scraps and thread. That might work. And I could sell eggs and vegetables once the garden's producing again. For the first time in weeks, Tabitha felt a spark of determination. It wasn't hope, not quite yet, but it was something close to it. Thank you, she said softly. For the fence. And for this. Garrett stood, putting on his hat. Just being neighborly. He paused at the door. I meant what I said at the cemetery, Tabitha. When you're ready to try again at anything, I'm here to help. As his wagon disappeared down the dusty road, Tabitha looked around at her homestead. Maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Tabitha's life. Grief still shadowed her days, but having a purpose saving the homestead gave her a reason to rise each morning. True to Garrett's suggestion, she had arranged for Thomas Tucker, the sheriff's 16-year-old son, to help with the heavier farm work in exchange for meals and a small share of future crops. Young Mary Wilkins, 14 but already a skilled gardener, came 3 days a week to help restore the vegetable garden to order. Tabitha devoted her evenings to sewing quilted baby blankets, embroidered handkerchiefs, and practical aprons that Martha Coleman at the mercantile agreed to sell on consignment. The work was steady, if not lucrative, and Tabitha found comfort in the repetitive motion of needle through fabric. Garrett visited every Sunday, always bringing something extra from the diamond, be a sack of flour, coffee beans, occasionally fresh meat. She protested at first, but he always had a logical explanation ready. The cook had ordered too much, the ranch owner's wife had sent it, they'd butchered more than needed. Whether these explanations were true, Tabitha couldn't say, but she came to look forward to his visits. On a particularly warm Sunday in late May, nearly 2 months after James's death, Garrett arrived with a small crate in his wagon. What's this? Tabitha asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she came out to greet him. Chicken feed, he said, lifting the crate down. And something else you might appreciate. He opened the crate to reveal 6 young hens, clucking nervously. Diamond bee hatched more than expected this spring. Thought you could use them to expand your flock. Tabitha smiled a genuine smile that reached her eyes, which Garrett noticed immediately. They're perfect. Thank you. They spent the morning building a larger chicken run, working side by side in comfortable companionship. As they hammered the last boards into place, Garrett glanced at her. You look better, he said simply. Tabitha paused, considering this. I feel different. Not better, exactly. Just different. He nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. Ready for some good news? Her eyebrows rose. Always. Sheriff Tucker mentioned that the banker, Mr. Phillips, might be willing to extend your mortgage terms if you can make a partial payment. Show good faith. Hope fluttered in Tabitha's chest. Really? How much would I need? About $30, from what Tucker said. I've done some asking around, and word is Phillips has a soft spot for widows. Lost his own mother young, apparently. Tabitha quickly calculated in her head. Between her sewing work and egg sales, she'd managed to save almost $20. I'm close, she said, excitement creeping into her voice. If I can sell a few more quilts before the end of the month. There's something else, Garrett said, his tone shifting slightly. The town's having a dance next Saturday. Founders' Day celebration. Tabitha stilled, hammer poised midair. Oh, thought you might want to go, he continued, suddenly very interested in aligning a board. The whole town will be there. Good opportunity to show off your sewing work, maybe take orders. That's a practical idea, she agreed, though something in his manner made her wonder if practicality was his only motivation. I could escort you, he added casually, if you'd like. Tabitha felt a flash of guilt, followed immediately by confusion. Was this improper? James had been gone just 2 months. But this wasn't a courting situation, it was a business opportunity, with Garrett simply offering transportation and protection. Still, she hesitated. I haven't been to a social gathering since. I understand, Garrett said quickly. It was just a thought. They worked in silence for a few minutes before Tabitha spoke again. What was it like for you? The first time you went back into society after Sarah died. Garrett set down his hammer, giving the question proper consideration. Strange. Like I was wearing someone else's skin. People either avoided talking about her entirely or wouldn't stop expressing their condolences. But I needed to rejoin the world eventually. He looked at her directly. Sarah would have wanted that. The simple truth of his words resonated with Tabitha. James had been vibrant, social, full of life. He would hate to think of her shutting herself away. I'll go, she decided. To sell my work, as you suggested. And yes, I would appreciate your escort. The smile that lit Garrett's face warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. The night of the Founders' Day dance arrived clear and mild, with a canopy of stars overhead. Tabitha stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, hardly recognizing herself. For the occasion, she'd repurposed one of her older dresses, a deep green calico that James had always admired. With careful stitching, she'd modernized it slightly and added a touch of lace at the collar. Her dark hair, normally pulled back in a practical bun, she'd arranged in a softer style, with a few curls framing her face. The woman in the mirror looked younger than she felt, with high cheekbones, wide brown eyes, and a mouth that had almost forgotten how to smile. A knock at the door announced Garrett's arrival. Taking a deep breath, Tabitha gathered her shawl and the small basket containing samples of her needlework. When she opened the door, she was momentarily taken aback by Garrett's appearance. Gone was the working ranch hand in dusty clothes. In his place stood a gentleman in a clean black suit, white shirt, and string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly taken a razor to his usual stubble. He held his hat in his hands, and for a moment, he simply stared at her. "You look beautiful," he said finally, the words coming out rough around the edges. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Blackwood." His smile deepened the lines around his eyes. "My buggy awaits, Mrs. Morgan." The ride into town was pleasant, with Garrett pointing out constellations in the night sky and sharing stories about the ranch's ornery cook. By the time they reached town, Tabitha's initial nervousness had subsided considerably. Silver Creek was small but thriving, its main street lined with hitching posts already full of horses and buggies. The town hall, normally used for council meetings and church socials, had been transformed with paper lanterns and wildflower arrangements. Music spilled from the open doors, a lively fiddle accompanied by piano and guitar. As they entered, Tabitha felt eyes turning toward them. While she'd been to town several times since James's death, this was her first social appearance, and certainly her first time arriving on Garrett Blackwood's arm. "Mrs. Morgan, how lovely to see you out and about." Martha Coleman, the mercantile owner's wife, approached immediately. "And those handkerchiefs you embroidered sold within 2 days. I was hoping you'd bring more." Tabitha gratefully showed Martha the contents of her basket, and soon a small circle of women had gathered to admire her work and place orders. Garrett quietly excused himself to get them refreshments, and Tabitha found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation. The evening progressed pleasantly. Though a few older women gave disapproving looks at Tabitha's presence at a dance so soon after her bereavement, most townsfolk were kind and welcoming. She even managed to secure enough orders to ensure she'd make the partial mortgage payment with money to spare. It was during a lull in the festivities, as the musicians took a break, that Henry Phillips, the banker, approached her. He was a stout man with thinning hair and an air of self-importance that made Tabitha instantly wary. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, bowing slightly. "A pleasure to see you this evening. My condolences on your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Phillips," she replied politely. "I understand you've been working to maintain the homestead on your own. Very admirable." His tone suggested he found it anything but. "However, I must be frank. Your husband borrowed a significant sum, and while I sympathize with your situation, business is business." Tabitha straightened her spine. "I'm aware of our obligations, Mr. Phillips. In fact, I'll be making a substantial payment before the end of the month." The banker's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Is that so? Well, that would be most unexpected." Before Tabitha could respond, Garrett materialized at her side, 2 cups of punch in hand. "Evening, Phillips," he said, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "I see you've met Mrs. Morgan, one of the county's most promising entrepreneurs." Phillips's expression soured slightly. "Blackwood. Yes, We were just discussing business matters. Then you'll be pleased to hear that Mrs. Morgan's handcrafts are in such demand that she's already secured orders from half the ladies in town. Garrett continued smoothly. And that's before anyone's seen the quilt she's donating to the church auction next month. Extraordinary workmanship. Tabitha shot him a surprised glance. She hadn't mentioned any quilt donation, but quickly played along. It's nearly finished. I'd be happy to show you my work sometime, Mr. Phillips, if you're interested in a commission for Mrs. Phillips. The banker seemed momentarily disarmed. Ah, well, perhaps. In any case, I look forward to receiving your payment, Mrs. Morgan. With a curt nod, he moved away through the crowd. A quilt donation? Tabitha asked quietly, accepting the punch Garrett offered. His eyes twinkled mischievously. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Besides, you could make one in your sleep, from what I've seen. She laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that surprised them both. I suppose I could. The musicians returned to their positions, and the fiddler struck up a waltz. Couples began moving to the center of the room. Would you care to dance? Garrett asked, setting his cup aside and extending his hand. Tabitha hesitated, her smile fading. I haven't danced since James, he finished for her. I know. We don't have to. She looked around the room, at the faces both familiar and new, at the life continuing all around her. Then she looked at Garrett, patient and understanding, offering but never demanding. Yes, she said finally, placing her hand in his. I would like to dance. Garrett led her to the floor with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. His hand at her waist was respectful, his lead confident but gentle. As they moved in time to the music, Tabitha gradually relaxed into the familiar rhythm. You dance well, she observed. My mother insisted all her sons learn. Said a man who could dance would never lack for female company. His expression turned wry. My brothers and I complained bitterly at the time. And now I'm grateful for her wisdom. His eyes held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the delicate thing growing between them. As the music swelled, Tabitha felt a weight lifting. Dancing with Garrett didn't erase James or diminish what they had shared. Instead, it felt like taking a step toward the future while carrying the past with honor. When the dance ended, they rejoined the gathering, mingling and conversing with their neighbors. Several times throughout the evening, Tabitha caught Garrett watching her with a soft expression that made her heart flutter in a way she'd thought impossible just weeks ago. By the time they left, the night air had cooled considerably. Garrett draped his coat over her shoulders as he helped her into the buggy. Thank you for escorting me tonight, Tabitha said as they started back toward her homestead. It was healing, somehow. Garrett nodded, his profile illuminated by moonlight. Sometimes the hardest step is simply showing up. They rode in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. Tabitha, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. She turned toward him, curious. The Diamond Bee is looking to expand its operations. Mr. Bentley, the owner, wants to diversify into crops, not just cattle. He's looking for someone to manage that side of things. And you're thinking of taking the position? She asked. No, Garrett said. I'm thinking of recommending you. Tabitha blinked in surprise. Me? But farming. You're smart with figures. And from what I've seen, you're not afraid of hard work. He glanced at her. It would mean a steady income. Plus, you could still work your own land. Best of both worlds. The idea was simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Do you really think Mr. Bentley would consider a woman for such a position? He's a businessman first and foremost. If you can make him money, he won't care if you're a woman, a man, or a grizzly bear. Garrett's mouth quirked up. Besides, his wife runs the books for the entire ranch. He respects capable women. Tabitha considered this unexpected opportunity. I would need to meet with him, discuss terms. He'll be in town next Thursday. I could arrange it. As they pulled up to her cabin, Tabitha felt a surge of gratitude for this man, who continually showed her new possibilities when all she could see were closed doors. Garrett, she said softly as he helped her down from the buggy, why are you doing all this for me? In the silver moonlight, his expression was serious. Because everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Even us. The words hung between them, laden with meaning. For a moment, Tabitha thought he might kiss her, and the realization that she wanted him to send a shock through her system. Instead, He simply squeezed her hand and bid her good night. As she watched him drive away, Tabitha touched her fingers to her lips, wondering at the path her life was taking and at the cowboy who seemed determined to walk it alongside her, one careful step at a time. Summer bloomed across the Arizona territory, transforming the landscape with wildflowers and new growth. On the Morgan homestead, similar transformations were underway. The vegetable garden flourished under Mary Wilkins's attentive care, the enlarged chicken flock produced eggs in abundance, and Thomas Tucker had helped plow and plant 10 acres with corn and wheat. Most significantly, Tabitha had secured a position with the Diamond B Ranch, overseeing their new farming venture. 3 days a week, she rode to the sprawling ranch headquarters, where she directed a small team of workers in establishing crop fields. The arrangement provided a steady income while still allowing her to maintain her own homestead. Mr. Phillips had been visibly shocked when she appeared at the bank with the full mortgage payment rather than the partial amount they'd discussed. His grudging respect had been almost as satisfying as the receipt he'd provided. On a warm Wednesday afternoon in July, Tabitha was in her garden, harvesting green beans, when she heard approaching hoofbeats. Expecting Garrett, who occasionally stopped by midweek when ranch business brought him nearby, she was surprised to see a stranger riding up to her cabin. Standing, she wiped her hands on her apron and moved to greet the visitor. He was a well-dressed man in his 40s, with a neat beard and the air of someone accustomed to authority. "Mrs. Morgan?" he called, dismounting smoothly. "Yes, I'm Tabitha Morgan," she replied cautiously. "Harold Winters." He introduced himself with a slight bow. "Attorney at law. I've been attempting to locate you for some time." Tabitha frowned. "Is there a problem, Mr. Winters?" "Not at all. Quite the contrary." He removed a leather document case from his saddlebag. "I represent the estate of William Hartfield of Kansas City. Your late husband's uncle, I believe." Tabitha's confusion deepened. "Yes, Uncle William. James mentioned him occasionally, but they weren't close. I believe they hadn't seen each other in years." "That may be so, but Mr. Hartfield never forgot his nephew. When he passed away 3 months ago, he left a provision in his will." Winters extracted a document from his case. "Mr. Hartfield bequeathed a sum of $500 to James Morgan, or in the event of his demise, to his widow." Tabitha's knees nearly buckled. $500? She repeated, certain she'd misheard. "Indeed," Winters confirmed, handing her the document. "As executor of the estate, I've brought the draft with me. You need only sign here to acknowledge receipt." In a daze, Tabitha invited the attorney inside, where she carefully read the papers before signing. The bank draft in her hands represented more money than she had ever possessed at one time, enough to clear all remaining debts and make substantial improvements to the homestead. After the attorney departed, promising to check in when next he passed through the territory, Tabitha sat at her table, staring at the draft. Emotions warred within her: gratitude for this unexpected blessing, sadness that it came from death, and a strange guilt, as if her recent happiness somehow dishonored James's memory. She was still sitting there an hour later when another visitor arrived. This time, it was indeed Garrett, his expression changing from greeting to concern when he saw her face. "What's happened?" he asked immediately, removing his hat as he entered the cabin. Wordlessly, Tabitha handed him the bank draft. His eyebrows rose as he read it. "Your husband's uncle," she explained. "An inheritance I never knew about." Garrett handed the draft back, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Tabitha, this is wonderful news." "Is it?" she asked quietly. "It feels, I don't know, wrong somehow, like I'm benefiting from James's death." Garrett pulled out a chair, sitting across from her. "You think James wouldn't want you to have this security?" "No, it's not that. He would be overjoyed." She shook her head, struggling to articulate her feelings. "It's more that I'm starting to build a life without him. Taking this job at the Diamond B, making plans for the future plans that don't include him. And now this money comes, and it feels like a sign that I should keep going forward, but part of me feels like I'm leaving him behind." Understanding dawned in Garrett's eyes. I know that feeling well. How did you handle it?" "Poorly, at first," he admitted with a rueful smile. "I spent a year working myself to exhaustion, barely sleeping, taking risks no sane man would take. Part of me didn't care if I lived or died." Tabitha's hand instinctively reached for his. "What changed?" Garrett's fingers intertwined with hers. I realized Sarah would have been furious with me for wasting the life she no longer had the privilege to live. His eyes met Tabitha's. Your James strikes me as the type of man who would want you to thrive, not just survive. Tabitha nodded slowly. He would. He always said life was for the living. She looked down at their joined hands. Garrett, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Anything. Why did you really come to my husband's grave that day? You hardly knew me. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. I knew James. Not well, but enough to respect him. When I heard he'd died, I went to pay my respects. He paused. But when I saw you there, alone. His voice trailed off. What? She prompted gently. I saw myself, 5 years ago, drowning in grief with no one to throw a line. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I couldn't walk away. The simple honesty of his answer touched Tabitha deeply. On impulse, she rose and moved around the table, then bent and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for not walking away. Garrett stood, bringing them face to face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, brief, but it sent a current through Tabitha that both frightened and exhilarated her. When they parted, she saw her own complicated emotions reflected in Garrett's expression. Too soon? He asked quietly. I don't know, she answered honestly. I care for you, Garrett. More than I expected to care for anyone again. But sometimes I feel like I'm betraying James by feeling this way. Garrett nodded, taking a step back to give her space. I understand. And I'll wait, Tabitha. However long you need. She smiled gratefully, and they spent the rest of the afternoon discussing practical matters, how best to use the inheritance, improvements to the homestead, the progress at the Diamond Bee. When Garrett finally departed, Tabitha walked to the hill where James was buried. The wooden cross stood as it had for months, though wildflowers now grew around the grave. Tabitha knelt in the grass, touching the carved letters of her husband's name. I miss you, she said softly. I think I always will. But I'm starting to understand that honoring your memory doesn't mean stopping my own life. She took a deep breath. I think I might be falling in love again, James. With a good man. A man I think you would have respected. The wind rustled through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang. No divine sign appeared. No voice from beyond, just the peaceful sounds of the living world continuing its eternal cycle. I'll always love you, Tabitha whispered. But I think it's time I try again. As summer waned into autumn, Tabitha's homestead underwent a remarkable transformation. With her inheritance wisely invested, she hired workers to complete a proper barn and expand the cabin, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. The 10 acres under cultivation yielded a respectable first harvest, and her position at the Diamond Bee had evolved into a true partnership, with Mr. Bentley increasingly relying on her agricultural expertise. Her relationship with Garrett had developed as well, though at a measured pace. They spent most Sundays together, sometimes riding across the countryside, other times simply sitting on her porch, talking about everything and nothing. Occasionally, they exchanged brief, tender kisses, but Garrett never pressed for more, respecting her need to move forward carefully. The town had noticed, of course. Some gossiped about the widow's unseemly haste in finding a new companion, but most viewed their developing relationship with approval. Garrett Blackwood was well respected, and anyone could see that Tabitha Morgan was flourishing under his attentive care. As October painted the landscape in rich autumnal colors, Silver Creek prepared for its annual Harvest Festival. The event drew people from across the county for competitions, dancing, and community celebration. This year, Tabitha had entered her finest quilt in the crafts contest and would be selling preserves from her garden's bounty. The morning of the festival dawned bright and clear. Tabitha dressed with special care in a new rust-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair, grown longer over the months, she arranged in a becoming style with tortoiseshell combs. Garrett arrived promptly at 9, looking handsome in his Sunday best. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. "You're a vision, Tabitha Morgan," he said, taking her hand and kissing it with exaggerated gallantry that made her laugh. "You're not so bad yourself, Cowboy," she replied, enjoying the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. They loaded her entries and goods for sale into Garrett's wagon and set off for town. The main street had been transformed, with colorful bunting stretched between buildings and stalls lining both sides. Farmers displayed prize produce, craftsmen demonstrated their skills, and the air was filled with the scent of baking pies and roasting meats. After setting up Tabitha's stall, they wandered through the festival together. Garrett proudly introduced her to ranchers from across the territory as the woman revolutionizing farming at the Diamond B, while Tabitha basked in his evident admiration. By midday, her preserves were selling briskly, and the judges were examining craft entries. As they passed the quilting display, Martha Coleman waved them over. "Tabitha, dear, your quilt is causing quite a stir." Mrs. Phillips herself was admiring the stitch work. "That's high praise indeed," Tabitha replied, knowing the banker's wife was considered the finest quilter in the county. "Oh, and Garrett," Martha continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Sheriff Tucker was looking for you earlier. Something about a telegram." Garrett frowned slightly. "Did he say what it was regarding?" "No, just that it seemed important." After assuring Tabitha he'd return shortly, Garrett made his way to the sheriff's office at the end of the street. Tabitha continued mingling with festival goers, accepting compliments on her preserves and discussing farming techniques with interested neighbors. She was demonstrating embroidery stitches to a group of young girls when she noticed Garrett returning. Something in his expression, tense, distracted, immediately caught her attention. Excusing herself, she met him at the edge of the crowd. "What is it?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Garrett took her arm, guiding her away from the bustle to a quieter spot beneath a cottonwood tree. "I received a telegram from my brother in Colorado. My father has taken ill quite seriously. Thomas thinks. He thinks I should come as soon as possible." Tabitha's heart contracted at the pain in his eyes. "Oh, Garrett, of course you must go." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll need to leave today. The stage to Tucson leaves in an hour, and from there I can catch the eastbound train." "How long will you be gone?" she asked, already feeling the impending absence like a physical ache. "I don't know. Weeks at least. Maybe longer, depending on." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Tabitha reached up, touching his face gently. "Your family needs you. Don't worry about anything here. I'll explain to Mr. Bentley." Gratitude flooded his expression. "I hate leaving you like this." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though her heart disagreed. "You've made sure of that, remember? I'm quite capable now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You always were capable, Tabitha Morgan. I just helped you remember it." He kissed her then, not with their usual restraint, but with a desperate intensity that left her breathless. When they parted, his eyes held hers with fierce determination. "Wait for me?" he asked, the question so much more than its simple words. "As long as it takes," she promised. Within the hour, Garrett had made hasty arrangements with Mr. Bentley, packed a small bag, and was boarding the stagecoach. Tabitha stood beside the road, waving until the coach disappeared in a cloud of dust, carrying away the man who had become central to her new life. The following weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Tabitha threw herself into work, overseeing both her homestead and the Diamond B's agricultural operations. Letters from Garrett arrived sporadically, each one treasured and read multiple times. His father's condition wavered, improving one week, declining the next, while Garrett remained in Colorado, helping his brothers manage the family ranch and supporting his mother. As November turned to December, Silver Creek prepared for Christmas celebrations. Though Tabitha participated in community activities, decorating the church and helping with the school pageant, her heart wasn't fully engaged. The approaching holiday, her first without James and now without Garrett as well, loomed like a bittersweet reminder of all she had lost and found. 2 weeks before Christmas, as Tabitha was hanging greenery in her cabin, a knock at the door startled her. Few visitors came calling in the late afternoon, especially in winter's early darkness. Opening the door cautiously, she found Thomas Tucker stamping snow from his boots. "Evening, Mrs. Morgan," he said, removing his hat. "Pa asked me to bring this out to you right away." He extended a telegram. Tabitha's heart leapt to her throat as she took the paper with trembling fingers. Telegrams rarely brought good news. Thanking Thomas and inviting him in to warm himself, She unfolded the message with dread. Arriving Silver Creek, December 23rd. Stop much to discuss. Stop. Garrett relief flooded through her, followed immediately by anticipation. Garrett was coming home, and just before Christmas. But what did he mean by much to discuss? Was his father worse? Was he planning to remain in Colorado permanently? The questions tormented her for the next 10 days as she prepared for his return. She cleaned the cabin until it gleamed, baked his favorite apple pie, and even sewed a new shirt as a Christmas gift. All the while, she tried to prepare herself for whatever news he might bring. December 23rd dawned clear and cold, with a fresh dusting of snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. Tabitha had arranged with Mr. Bentley to meet Garrett's stage in town, and she dressed with nervous care in her best wool dress, a deep blue that set off her complexion. The stagecoach was scheduled to arrive at noon, but Tabitha reached town an hour early, too anxious to wait at home. She busied herself with last-minute Christmas shopping, though her eyes constantly strayed to the road leading into town. Finally, the distant sound of hooves and wheels announced the stage's approach. Tabitha's heart pounded as she joined the small gathering outside the Silver Creek Hotel, where the coach would stop. As it pulled to a halt in a swirl of snow, her eyes searched eagerly for Garrett's familiar figure. The door opened, and passengers began disembarking. A traveling salesman, an elderly couple, a young woman with a baby. Tabitha's anticipation turned to confusion as the last passenger stepped down, and the driver began unloading luggage. Where was Garrett? Tabitha. The voice came from behind her, and she whirled around to find Garrett standing there, his eyes drinking her in as if memorizing her features. For a moment, she was too stunned to move. Then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine and home. How did you, she began, pulling back to look at him. Road ahead, he explained, his voice rough with emotion. Couldn't wait for that blasted stage any longer. Left my bags to follow. His hands framed her face, and he kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. Only when someone nearby cleared their throat did they reluctantly separate, suddenly aware of the amused glances from townsfolk. I have the wagon, Tabitha said, taking his arm. Let's go home. The ride back to her homestead was filled with Garrett's news. His father had recovered sufficiently that the immediate crisis had passed, though his health would never be robust again. His brothers had matters well in hand at the family ranch, and his mother had practically ordered him to return to Arizona. She said, and I quote, I won't have you moping around here like a lovesick calf when your young lady is waiting for you in Arizona, Garrett related with a chuckle. Tabitha laughed. I think I would like your mother very much. She'd adore you, he assured her. In fact, she made me promise to bring you to Colorado for a visit next spring. The casual way he included her in his future plans sent a warm glow through Tabitha. As they approached her cabin, now visible through the trees with smoke curling invitingly from the chimney, Garrett grew suddenly quiet. What is it? She asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. You mentioned in your telegram that we had much to discuss. Garrett took a deep breath. Being away, seeing my father so ill, it clarified some things for me. Made me realize what's truly important. He turned to face her fully. Life is uncertain, Tabitha. The time we have with those we love is precious. The wagon rolled to a stop before her cabin, but neither made a move to disembark. Snow had begun falling again, gentle flakes drifting around them like a private curtain. While I was in Colorado, Garrett continued, his voice low and earnest, I visited Sarah's grave. For the first time in years, I stood there and felt peace instead of pain. I told her about you, about how you've brought light back into my life when I thought the darkness would never end. Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes. Garrett, please, let me finish, he said gently, taking her gloved hands in his. I know it's been less than a year since James passed. I know society would say it's too soon. But I also know what's in my heart, and I hope I know what's in yours. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Tabitha's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Tabitha Morgan, I love you. I think I've loved you since that day at the cemetery when I saw your strength even in the depths of grief. I don't want to waste another day without you by my side. His eyes, earnest and vulnerable, met hers. Will you marry me? For a heartbeat, Tabitha was transported back to that day at James's grave, when a stranger had taken her hands and promised to help her try again when she was ready. Now, months later, she knew with absolute certainty that she was ready to embrace love again, to build a future with this remarkable man who had helped her heal. Yes, she whispered, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Yes, Garrett Blackwood, I will marry you. His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, snow falling around them like a blessing from the heavens. Later, as they sat before the fire in her cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, Garrett asked, "When would you like to be married?" Tabitha considered the question. "I don't want a long engagement. Perhaps in the spring, when the wildflowers bloom. We could have a simple ceremony here, with both our homesteads visible in the distance." "That sounds perfect," Garrett agreed, kissing her temple. "Though I admit, spring seems very far away at the moment." She smiled up at him. "We've both learned patience the hard way, haven't we?" His expression grew serious. "Tabitha, there's something else we should discuss. After we're married, would you prefer to live here, or at the Diamond Bee? I know how much this place means to you." The question touched her deeply. Many men would simply assume their wives would follow them. But Garrett understood what the homestead represented, not just James's legacy, but her own hard-won independence. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "This land will always be special to me, but it's not just James's memory that makes it so. It's what I've built here, with your help. What we've built." She looked around the cabin, seeing not just the past but the possibilities. "I think we could make something wonderful here, together. Expand the farming operation, perhaps raise horses like you've talked about." Relief and happiness spread across Garrett's face. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've grown rather attached to this place myself. Besides," Tabitha added with a mischievous smile, "the cabin does have that new second bedroom now." Garrett's eyebrows rose. "For guests?" "Eventually," she said softly. "But I was thinking it might make a fine nursery someday." The look of pure joy that illuminated his features was something Tabitha knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Spring arrived in a riot of color across the Arizona territory. Wildflowers carpeted the hills, trees burst into leaf, and on the Morgan homestead, soon to be the Blackwood Morgan Ranch, final preparations were underway for a wedding. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and mild. Tabitha stood at her bedroom window, watching the sunrise gild the landscape. In just a few hours, she would become Garrett's wife. The thought filled her with a quiet joy that had nothing to do with the excitement of the day and everything to do with the life they were building together. Martha Coleman and several other women from town arrived to help her prepare. They brought flowers for her hair, a special cake for the celebration, and the cheerful chatter of friends sharing a momentous occasion. "Your dress is absolutely lovely, Tabitha," Martha said as she helped arrange the simple white gown with its delicate lace overlay. Tabitha had sewn it herself, working evenings by lamplight over the past months. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing the fabric nervously. "Do you think Garrett will like it?" Martha laughed. "My dear, that man would think you beautiful in a potato sack. But yes, he'll be absolutely speechless when he sees you in this." As midday approached, guests began arriving: townspeople, workers from the Diamond Bee, Garrett's family who had traveled from Colorado. A simple arch covered in wildflowers had been erected on the hill overlooking both properties, not far from where James was buried. It had been Tabitha's idea to include his resting place in the ceremony, not from morbid sentiment, but as acknowledgement that her past was part of the journey that had led her to this new beginning. Garrett waited for her beneath the arch, looking impossibly handsome in a new black suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. Beside him stood his brothers, and beside the spot where Tabitha would stand waited Martha Coleman and young Mary Wilkins, who had become like a sister to Tabitha over the past year. The small gathering of guests turned as Tabitha approached, walking alone along the path strewn with flower petals. She had considered asking someone to give her away but had ultimately decided against it. She was giving herself to this marriage freely, wholly, with full awareness of both its joys and responsibilities. Garrett's face as he watched her approach was a study in wonder and devotion. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, just as he had nearly a year ago in this very spot. though under very different circumstances. "You are breathtaking," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Sheriff Tucker, who had agreed to officiate, began the ceremony with words about love's resilience and the courage it takes to open one's heart after loss. Tabitha and Garrett had written their own vows, simple promises to cherish, support, and respect each other through whatever life might bring. When it came time to exchange rings, Garrett produced not only the simple gold band that would match her engagement ring, but a second, unexpected item, a delicate chain. "This is for your first wedding ring," he explained quietly, "so you can keep it close to your heart always." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at this thoughtful gesture. She had worried about what to do with James's ring, not wanting to dishonor either her past or her future. Garrett had found the perfect solution, honoring her history while creating their new beginning. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona," Sheriff Tucker proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Garrett." The kiss they shared was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their applauding guests, Tabitha caught sight of James's grave, now surrounded by wildflowers. A sense of peace washed over her, not the absence of grief, but its transformation into something that could coexist with new joy. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music, dancing, and abundant food shared among friends and family. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the land, Garrett drew Tabitha away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking their property. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "Incredibly so, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "Though I might need some time to get used to my new name." "We have a lifetime for that," he murmured against her hair. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the fading light transform their land. The expanded garden, the new corral where Garrett had already installed 2 fine breeding mares, the fields ready for spring planting, all of it represented their shared vision. "I want to show you something," Garrett said eventually, taking her hand and leading her toward the barn. Inside, he guided her to a back corner where a cloth-covered object stood. "A wedding present," he explained, removing the cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden cradle. "I've been working on it in secret for months." Tabitha ran her fingers over the smooth wood, admiring the intricate carvings of wildflowers and horses along the sides. "It's beautiful," she whispered, emotion making her voice tremble. "Too presumptuous?" Garrett asked, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Perfect timing, actually." His brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared suddenly as understanding dawned. "Tabitha, are you saying, I suspected last month, but wanted to be certain before I told you?" Her hands moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. "If my calculations are correct, we should welcome our child around Christmas." Garrett's whoop of joy echoed through the barn as he lifted her in a careful embrace, spinning her around before setting her gently back on her feet. "A baby," he marveled, his hand covering hers protectively. "Our baby." As darkness fell and their guests began departing, offering final congratulations and well wishes, Tabitha and Garrett stood arm in arm on the porch of what was now truly their home. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their growing love, and now their marriage. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine feeling this kind of happiness again," Tabitha said softly. "I thought that part of my life was over." Garrett squeezed her hand. "Life has a way of surprising us." "Indeed it does, Mr. Blackwood," she agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "And I'm looking forward to a lifetime of surprises with you." As he lowered his lips to hers, Tabitha silently thanked the twists of fate that had brought this remarkable man to her side on her darkest day, the day a cowboy took her hands at a grave and promised they would try again when she was ready. 6 years later, on a bright autumn morning, Tabitha Blackwood stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching her husband instruct their 5-year-old son, James William Blackwood, on the proper way to groom a pony. The boy's serious expression as he concentrated on his father's every word made her smile. He had Garrett's determined nature and her own meticulous attention to detail. From inside the house came the cheerful chatter of their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, who was helping Martha Coleman arrange flowers in the dining room. The child's dark curls and expressive brown eyes were so like Tabitha's own that people often remarked they could be twins separated by decades. The Blackwood Morgan Ranch had prospered beyond their initial hopes. Their innovative farming methods had inspired other ranchers in the territory to diversify their operations, and the horses Garrett bred were now sought after throughout the Southwest. The original cabin had been incorporated into a larger, comfortable home that maintained its rustic charm while accommodating their growing family. Tabitha's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where their third child had just begun to make its presence known. She hadn't told Garrett yet, planning to share the news on their anniversary next week. The sound of an approaching wagon drew her attention. Thomas Tucker, now a deputy sheriff following in his father's footsteps, was driving up the lane with a load of lumber for the new schoolhouse being built on the edge of their property. The school had been Tabitha's idea, a place where children from neighboring ranches and farms could receive an education without having to travel all the way to Silver Creek. "Morning, Mrs. Blackwood," Thomas called, tipping his hat. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is, Thomas. Come in for coffee when you've unloaded. Martha's here with her famous apple cake." As Thomas continued to the construction site, Garrett and little James approached the house, the boy proudly leading his pony. "Mama, look. I brushed copper all by myself, and Papa says I did it right." Tabitha knelt to embrace her son, inhaling the mingled scents of hay, horse, and the indefinable sweetness of childhood. "He looks magnificent, darling. You've done an excellent job." James beamed at the praise, then darted into the house, calling for his sister to come see his handiwork. Garrett climbed the porch steps and gathered Tabitha in his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're glowing this morning," he observed, his eyes warm with love. "Something special on your mind?" Tabitha smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps, but you'll have to wait until our anniversary to find out." His eyebrows rose with interest. "Now that's not fair, Mrs. Blackwood. Teasing a man like that." "Patience is a virtue, Mr. Blackwood," she countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him properly. Their moment was interrupted by the children bursting back onto the porch, Sarah insisting it was her turn to ride the pony, and James protesting that she was still too little. "How about a compromise?" Garrett suggested, scooping Sarah into his arms. "James can lead Copper, and Sarah can ride with Papa walking alongside to make sure she's safe." Both children agreed to this solution, and soon Garrett was leading them toward the corral, Sarah chattering excitedly from her perch on the gentle pony, while James solemnly held the lead rope. Tabitha watched them go, her heart full to bursting. Life had taught her that happiness was not guaranteed, that loss and grief were inevitable companions on life's journey. But it had also shown her that love could be found again, that joy could take root in the most unexpected places, and that the human heart had an astonishing capacity for renewal. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and Martha had returned to town, Tabitha and Garrett sat on the porch swing, enjoying the peaceful sounds of a desert night. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Do you ever think about how we started?" she asked quietly. "That day at the cemetery?" Garrett's fingers traced lazy patterns on her arm. "Often. Though I prefer to think about how far we've come since then." Tabitha nodded, understanding completely. They visited James's grave regularly, keeping it tidy and adorned with fresh flowers. They had taught their children that the man buried there was an important part of their family's story, not someone to be forgotten or unmentioned. It was a gift Garrett had given her the freedom to honor her past, while fully embracing their present and future. "We should visit your parents again soon," she said, "before winter makes travel difficult. And before I'm too far along to enjoy the journey," she added casually. For a moment, Garrett continued his rhythmic caress of her arm. Then her words registered, and he stilled. "Tabitha, are you saying what I think you're saying?" She turned to face him, smiling at the hope and joy already dawning in his eyes. "Yes, my love. Another little Blackwood will join our family next spring." The wonder on his face, the same expression he'd shown at the news of each previous pregnancy, filled her with tenderness. No matter how many children they might have, Garrett never took the miracle for granted. "How long have you known?" he asked, his hand moving to rest protectively over her stomach. "Only a few weeks. I wanted to surprise you on our anniversary, but it seems I couldn't wait." She covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" In answer, Garrett kissed her with such tenderness and passion that words became unnecessary. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "You have given me more happiness than I ever thought possible," he whispered. "Every day with you, with our children, is a gift I never take for granted." As the moon rose over their land, casting silver light across the prosperous ranch they had built together, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from strangers to soul mates, from broken hearts to a family bound by unbreakable love. And it had all begun with a cowboy who took her hands at a grave and promised they would try again when she was ready.